happening to housing in this country and what's happening to health. Okay. And I say that as someone who earns a living from a freelance living from housing associations, as well as being a health campaigner. It's pretty clear to me now that when you add up the policies of this government, it amounts to the abolition of social housing. That's exactly what's being done to the NHS. The frightening thing is that we can see that we've been sleepwalking in this direction on housing, health, education, you name it, through every single government since Thatcher's. This event is about the land grab, and it starts in the perfect place. That shiny new hospital behind me, the Royal London Hospital, was built under the PFI, Private Finance Initiative. PFI could be one of the worst financial cons that's ever been visited on this country. Under PFI, major projects like hospital building are funded by borrowing from the private sector instead of the public sector. It's a bit like someone with a good credit score choosing to build a hospital on a credit card. PFI was actually invented by John Major's government, but under Blair and Brown, 100 PFI buildings were signed off. Unfortunately for us, the largest of those is the building behind me. Barts Health NHS Trust is paying out £2.4 million a week to Innisfree and Skanska. And that's going to rise every year for the next 30 years. By the end of the deal, we'll have paid out £7.1 million for a hospital that cost £1.1 billion to build. It's completely unaffordable. The trust is heading for a deficit by the end of this year of £140 million. Earlier this year, the Chief Financial Officer, the CEO, the Chief Nurse and the Board Chair of Barts Health all resigned. Since then, the Chief Medical Officer's gone as well. The whole trust is now in special measures after CQC inspections found 3 of the hospitals inadequate, including the hospital behind me. Hundreds of jobs have been cut and down-banded, and many people have left, leaving behind a recruitment nightmare and the biggest agency bill in the NHS. Right now, the future of East London's hospitals couldn't be more dire. So what's really going on? In line with the whole neoliberal austerity agenda and in line with what's happening to public housing, PFI is actually about shrinking the state. These private loans aren't on the government's books, which is parallel to the way councils were frozen out and housing associations were forced to borrow from the banks instead of getting social housing grants. That wasn't on the government's books either. This is also about privatisation, firstly because the debts put us in hock to the private sector, and secondly because PFI deals also hand over the running of soft services to private companies who hold down wages and conditions and hit the trade unions. It's also about cutting services, because on average the PFI hospitals will be rebuilt with 26% fewer beds. The Royal London has 2 empty hospitals it can't afford to use. The top 2 floors are empty. They're now talking about, guess what, putting private services in there. The parallel with what's happening to social housing estates really couldn't be any clearer, could it? But with PFI, you also get financialisation. When we look at that building behind us, we see a hospital, but that's not what the PFI investors see. They've made profits as high as 50 to 70% just refinancing the PFI debt. And there are bits of equity in that hospital being traded all over the world for rates of interest as high as 15 to 30% a year. But finally, and this is where we started, PFI is about a land grab. Up and down the country, NHS trusts have been selling off land and buildings to make their PFI payments. That's why the London Chest Hospital building is being sold off, as well as the old Royal London building, which is also behind me. At At Whipps Cross in Leytonstone, also part of Barts Health, they're planning to sell off part of the old hospital buildings to build housing. Just like the way they're selling off parts of the old council estate land to build housing. And we all know what kind of housing that's likely to be. In the NHS, if just like Barts go bust, their PFI investors get to own the hospitals, not just the land. They can then sell them on to any private company that wants to buy and run them. Some researchers think that those overpriced, shiny, bright towers were built and designed in the first place to work for the private sector. You could easily say the same thing about those tiny flats being built for so-called affordable rent at the moment around places like Tower Hamlets. So we've been campaigning as People versus Barts PFI, and I've got a petition with me if anybody wants to sign it. We're calling for the ending of the PFI at Barts Health. But in the meantime, I agree, it's absolutely important that we all, as different campaigns, carry on talking to each other. We need to keep joining up the dots.
Woo! Ladies and gentlemen,